Chapter 19. They slept fitfully that first night, especially Samuel. He could not get over the feeling that somebody was following him. The next day the feeling abated somewhat, but by evening Samuel saw that his father was sliding back a bit. The food Emily had sent was good, but his father needed fat meat. Samuel decided to do a quick evening hunt for raccoon. One shot, hopefully away to the west, was all he would allow himself. With luck, nobody would hear it. They were walking southwest in marshy country, perfect for coon, and he saw tracks all over the place. He left the group resting and moved to the west an eighth of a mile, walk hunting, and hadn't gone 50 yards before he saw a small female with 2 kits. That wasn't what he wanted, and he kept going, out from her in circles. Within 20 minutes he came on what he was looking for, a large boar coon halfway up a tall oak, sitting on a side branch. He moved east of the coon so the sound would go west into the forest, aimed carefully and took him in the head, so that the animal fell backward off the limb, dead when he hit the ground. Samuel gutted him quickly and left the entrails for scavengers. Some people ate coon liver, he knew, and bear liver. Bear and raccoon meat were similar, but he never trusted it. An old man had once told him, "Bear and coon liver will give you the gut gripes," so he stayed away from it. Back with the others, he skinned the coon, built a small, very small fire with the driest wood he could locate, and cooked the meat in half-pound chunks, fat dripping from it. He killed the fire as soon as the meat was cooked. He forced his father to eat several helpings of it. Then he and his mother and Annie ate until they were full. He saved the rest for his father to eat over the next 2 or 3 days. They wanted to talk then, especially Annie, who was nearly bursting. "My tucker is about to blow up," she told him, but he shook his head, wiped the grease off his mouth, took his rifle, and went back up the trail a quarter mile. He sat in a small stand of hazel brush next to the trail, dozing all night, watching. The sound of the gunshot worried him immensely, as did the smell of smoke from the fire. Even a soft breeze could carry the odor of smoke for miles. But he needn't have worried. Nobody came along, and he went back to the family at dawn and awakened them. After letting them tend to themselves in the woods, since there were no privies, he started moving again in silence. That day they stopped for breaks 4 times, and he forced his father to eat more coon. The rest of them ate the remainder of Emily's venison and corn dodgers. They started to hit cross trails about midday. There was still good forest all around them, and they walked in a beautiful green tunnel, although the trail seemed to get more beaten down as they moved southwest. Now and again they came to cross trails that ran east-west, and they went west. These trails were even more compacted, and twice they crossed over paths with twin ruts where carts and wagons had moved through. These frightened Samuel. They were so wide and exposed that he was especially cautious in the way he let his family cross them. He stood and waited for 10, 20, 30 beats, listening, then sent one person across at a run, waiting and listening for another long stretch before sending the next person and the next, and then, finally, himself. Which made it all the more difficult to believe when, after all that care, he got caught. On day 4, even at the slow pace, Samuel thought that they had close to 15 miles a day. They came into an area that seemed slightly more civilized. Forest still, but here and there a farm off to the east. They had to bear west to avoid the larger cleared areas. The cross trails were becoming more substantial as well, double-rutted roads appearing fairly often, and now and then proper roads, well-traveled, hand-graded, and planked over the muddy spots. They came on such a road near the end of the 4th day. It was sunny, although nearly evening, and they had relaxed, knowing they would soon stop for the night. Samuel came around a tight turn in the trail and stepped out onto a real road without thinking. He was 2 feet away from the rear end of a British cavalry horse. Samuel froze. The man on the horse, an officer, was looking into the brush on the other side of the road, as was his horse, both ears cocked. The officer had his saber drawn, held down at his side at a slight angle, ready. To his left were 5 more men on horses, all facing the same way, staring intently, short muskets at the ready, their sabers still in the scabbards. A second, 2, and they still hadn't seen Samuel. The picture would be frozen in his mind for the rest of his life. A split second when everything was still, sane, controlled, nobody hurt, nobody dead, all sitting on their horses, all staring at the other side of the road, all alive. And then, chaos. One man, young with rosy cheeks, caught sight of Samuel and turned. His mouth opened. He called, starting to aim his musket at Samuel at the same instant that Samuel raised his rifle, cocking the hammer. But before he could shoot, or the soldier could shoot, the officer wheeled his horse, which knocked Samuel away, and chopped his saber down at Samuel just as Samuel pulled the trigger on his rifle, aiming up at the officer, and the ball taking the man just beneath the chin, killing him instantly as the saber barely caught the edge of Samuel's shoulder. Samuel fell back to see his father coming out of the woods to help him. "No!" he said as the other soldiers swung their muskets around, when like thunder, like the very voice of the god of war gone mad, the other side of the road erupted in a shattering roar of flame and smoke. The men on the horses were blown off their mounts into the brush, dead by rebel fire. 2 horses were hit, screaming, staggering back into the brush. Samuel leaned back on his father's arm and, without thinking, reloaded. The rebels reloaded, following the redcoats off the road where they had fled, and killed the wounded horses. Then silence, as about 15 men came out of the brush and checked the British dead for papers. Samuel tried not to look at the officer he had killed. As with the Indian, it had happened by reflex, so quick and final. The death bothered him, but when he thought of that saber coming down at him, he knew there had been no choice. A soldier in a blue Continental uniform came up to him. "I'm Sergeant Whitby. We're from the 13th Foot, out of Philadelphia. And you?" Samuel pointed with a vague wave to his rear, where Mother and Annie came out of the brush to stand by Father. Samuel couldn't talk. He kept staring at the dead officer, whose hat had come off. The man had long brown hair that waved in the light breeze near the ground. It's like he's still alive, Samuel thought. Like that part of him is still not dead somehow. Maybe I didn't really... Samuel's father cleared his throat. "We're refugees, trying to get to Philadelphia in safety. My wife and I were prisoners in New York, and my son Samuel rescued us. This is our daughter, Annie. May we walk with you?" "Sir, we can do better than that." Sergeant Whitby turned to his troops. "Peters, Donaldson, gather up those 4 horses. Put this man and his wife and little girl on 3 horses, and all the rest of the equipment, muskets and sabers, on the other. The rest of you get these bodies off the road." He turned back to Samuel's father. "We were sent to set up an ambuscade and take a prisoner or 2 to find out about the situation in New York. Since you came from there, I'm going to consider the mission accomplished. You tell us what you know, and there's no reason you can't ride in comfort." He turned to Samuel, smiled, and said, "I take it you have no objections to walking." Samuel shook his head, then watched the soldiers drag the officer's body back into the brush, with the rest load the horses and start back down the road toward Philadelphia, toward safety. But Samuel hung back, leaning on his rifle, watching them until they were out of sight around a bend. It was over now, he knew. The run, the madness, listening to every crack of a twig, worrying over every brush of a leaf. His parents and Annie would be safe now. A great weight came off him. And then he thought, no, we will be safe now. It's over. But still he hung there, hesitant to go, to follow, until a young soldier came trotting back and waved at him to come. He nodded, picked up his rifle, and jogged to catch up. It was over.